Hey guys, MetalJesus here. Now I suspect that most of the viewers of my channel are already familiar with some of the more rare and collectible console games, but I do get the question a lot from people who want to know what are some of the more rare and collectible big box PC games. In this video, I'm going to show you a bunch of them, tell you what makes them kind of special and rare and also hard to find, and I think it's going to really surprise you. Let's take a look. Now I mentioned surprises, and this is definitely a surprise for me because I had no idea how much this game had gone up in value. So this is the original Gabriel Knight from Sierra, and this is the origami release is what they call this. This is basically a really weird box that we put out back when this game came out on CD-ROM. And as you can see here, this is still sealed. This copy right here is actually my buddy Joshua, the big JB's copy here. But I had no idea that this thing had gone up in value. One recently sold for $800 on eBay. I'm shocked. Here's something pretty cool. This is Doom, the registered mail order version. Now you're probably wondering, what's the big deal? I mean, Doom came out on every system, but if you notice, this is actually a smaller box. And that's because this would be the version that you would have got had you actually mail ordered this directly from id Software. Now, get this. This sells currently for about $350 in great condition. And I think it's worth mentioning at this point that probably the reason why this is so unusual and so rare is because so few people would have bought it this way. Most people would have bought the big box version at their local store. Here is the Duke Nukem 2 registered version, and this typically goes for about $150 or so if you can get the original box version, which, if you are a gamer like me, you know this is kind of unusual because we would play the shareware version to death. It was very unusual to actually see a big box version like this. And many of these early 2D platforming games on the PC are somewhat collectible. So here you see Jazz Jackrabbit 2, which goes for about $100. But the thing is that if you were a PC gamer like me at the time, 2D platformers that were good were actually pretty hard to find, and so we have a lot of nostalgia built up for some of these really good ones. It's worth noting that this release of Jazz Jackrabbit 2 is actually from Epic Mega Games, but we know that as Epic Games today, which of course went on to make Unreal and Gears of War and so many other great games. I like how this game here comes with a mini color comic book built into the front of the manual. So cool. Here's something you don't see every day. Now, obviously some of you are familiar with Infocom. They made great text adventures, but this game here is special, specifically this release. So this of course is suspended, but it's the mask box. And as you can see here, why it would be called that, because it has this really weird plastic 3D mask in there, and it's very uncommon to find it in such good condition like this. That mask over time gets brittle and will break. As you can see, this one is obviously in very good condition, and typically these go for about $150 or so. Speaking of the Infocom games, their most popular series of games are of course the Zork games. Now here is the Zork trilogy, and this is interesting because this is one of the more collectible Infocom games out there, which is kind of unusual because the Zork games would have sold very well. But this trilogy has something really cool. It has all the feelies or extras you would expect, but in here is a very special metal coin, and I believe it only came in this version of it, and it's made of metal, it's very heavy, and technically it's the currency that you use in these games. So a lot of people are looking for this particular version of the game, especially if you're a Zork fan. The bummer is that there are counterfeits out there. People make counterfeits of this thing, so you have to kind of be careful. It's just really hard to find original complete copies of this game, but if you do, well, it's going to cost you $200 or more. This is the version of Ultima 1 that a lot of us remember playing back in the day. That cover is absolutely a classic. However, not many people realize that this is actually a remake of the 1981 original that was sold in baggies. If you're lucky enough to find one of those baggy versions from 1981, well, those things go for $2,000 or more. They're extremely hard to find. This version right here is definitely a little bit more reasonable. It'll cost you about $200 or so, depending on the version. The PC version tends to, command the most amount of money. I just like the fact that it comes with these coins, and normally, at least in later releases of Ultima, they would have a cloth map. This one actually has the map broken out into regions on cards. Very cool. Do you remember way back when EA was a well-respected game publisher full of all sorts of creative ideas? And at that time, they put out these really cool, thin album cover style games. Do you remember those? I certainly do. And one RPG that came out on that format that is well remembered, especially on the Apple II, is the original Wasteland. Wasteland is now considered a classic RPG, and it's an early example of a role-playing game with a persistent world. Now, it also is the inspiration for the later Fallout games. What's interesting from a collecting standpoint is that they radically changed the packaging when they brought it over to the PC. This obviously looks much more like every other PC release at the time, and it's hard to say which one is actually more collectible. Me personally, I like the original Apple II version, but both will cost you about $100 to say $120, depending on what box you prefer. You can't talk about big box PC collecting without at least mentioning some of the amazing releases that LucasArts/Lucasfilm games made back then, because so many of them are beloved. And here's something you don't see every day. This is the Day of the Tentacle. This is, of course, the triangle box. Very hard to find, highly sought after, and this is going to set you back, well, it's going to hurt, but it's going to cost you about $300 or more. And some gamers may not realize that Lucasfilm's very first adventure game is Labyrinth, based on the movie. And so collectors going for a complete collection, well, they're going to drop about $150 for this. Here's an adventure game that most of us are familiar with. This, of course, is The Secret of Monkey Island. However, you may not realize that there are multiple versions of this. This one right here you see is the 16 color version. This is the very first release of this game, and therefore it's actually harder to find than the 256 color version that came out later. I like how these games are packed full of stuff, including the Adventurer newspaper, and here is Dial a Pirate, which was used for the copy protection. If you want the original 16 color version, well, it's gonna cost you anywhere from $150 to $200. Maniac Mansion is another adventure game that a lot of gamers like me grew up with, loved it, and now we want to put it into our collection. But because they're getting a little bit hard to find, especially complete, they're getting pricey. Now this one's not crazy. This was, going to cost you about $100 to $150 with all the stuff in there. I do want to mention though that there are times when gamers like me, collectors like me, we don't even really care if the floppy disks work. I know that's what I think because I can get the game somewhere else. I can go to GOG.com or maybe get it off Steam or get it in a more modern compilation, but it's all this extra stuff here, all this really cool copy protection, the maps, the merchandising, the catalogs. That's the stuff that you're paying for, that original stuff that came with these games. Continuing on with the classic Lucasfilm/LucasArts adventure games, of course you have Zach McCracken and the Alien Mindbenders, another game that a lot of people would like to own, and depending on the version, this might cost you anywhere from like $120 to up to $200. Loom is another Lucas game that can take a long time to find, especially if you want a complete copy. What's cool about this release is that buried at the bottom of the box, underneath all the floppies and the hint books and manuals and stuff, is a cassette. And this is actually kind of like a radio play. It can be tough to get a complete copy of this game with that cassette because I think most people at the time took that cassette and put it with their other cassettes, next to their stereo and forgot to put it back in the box. So getting it complete is going to cost you about $100 or so. Here is the version of the Prince of Persia that I remember. This is called the Trapezoid release. And as you can see, the cardboard bottom pulls out there and you can get access to the manual and the floppies, stuff like that. And here's a second game in the series. It has a similar style, but of course it's reversed. But the original version was released in 1989 on the Apple II and imported to other platforms. I'm showing the Tandy version right here. The original game's going to cost anywhere from $70 to $120 depending on the version. I get a lot of questions from people who find these SSI Gold Box games out in the wild and they're wondering what they're worth. And the truth is, most of them are fairly common and not really worth more than, say, $30 to $50 a piece. But there's one game in the series that's worth an awful lot, and that is the AOL version of Neverwinter Nights. What makes this game special is that it is technically the world's very first graphical, massively multiplayer online role-playing game. To get a complete copy of this game with its original box and everything inside can set you back anywhere from $300, $500, maybe even more. Here's a series of RPGs that many of us are very familiar with. That is, of course, the Elder Scrolls series, and the first game is Arena. Now, this game goes for about $150 to $200, depending on the condition. I think Daggerfall is a little bit more easy to find these days, but it still can set you back about $100 to $150. I absolutely love that foil cover right there, the way the light plays upon it. So sexy. And then there are two offshoot games that can be relatively hard to find, although they're not super expensive. The first one is Redguard, and then the second one is Battlespire. Now, Battlespire is really interesting because that's technically a survival horror style game, and both of those can cost about $100 or so if they're open, obviously more if they're sealed. Ultima 7 The Black Gate is a relatively easy game to find, not super collectible, but what is collectible are the two expansion packs. You can pay anywhere from $120 to $200 a piece for these expansion packs because they're relatively hard to find now in good condition. Here's something I first heard about from Chris Kohler, and that is the original version of King's Quest. This was released on the IBM PC Junior, and notice it's a clamshell release. It looks like business software. And frankly, the reason why it does look like business software is because Sierra made a deal with IBM to develop the game and showcase the computer, but it ultimately flopped. If you can find a copy of this with a keyboard overlay, it'll set you back about $150. Many modern gamers got introduced to the Fallout series in the third game, but many retro gamers like me look fondly back to the original first two. And because of that reason, they're somewhat sought after. So depending on how complete they are in the condition, well, you can pay anywhere from, say, $150 to maybe $200, and definitely more if they're sealed. What's interesting, though, is that Fallout Tactics doesn't exactly command a high price, even though I think getting the big box version like this is way more difficult than the previous two. And I think it's simply because the game is not as, well regarded. People aren't quite as nostalgic for it. Here's another Sierra game that I had no idea was so sought after and so collectible these days. This, of course, is Quest for Glory 4, Shadows of Darkness. This is nicknamed the Purple Box. Now, depending on condition, this can go for, say, $100 up to $200 or more. Now, the reason why this surprises me so much is because while we were at Sierra, these were everywhere. We had them, you'd have like 10 boxes stacked high. So it's kind of funny to me that this is the one that a lot of collectors want. But the fourth game is considered the best in the series, so obviously a lot of fans are nostalgic for it, and this is the original release, so this is the one that they want. Some collectors may forget that console games and arcade games occasionally made their way to the PC. You see Super C here, which of course is a Contra game, and it is very collectible on PC, as well as the original Metal Gear, also on PC. People don't realize this, and what's funny is that both of these versions are considered to be pretty much terrible, but they are some of the more rare and difficult Contra and Metal Gear games to find. So if you're going for a complete collection, you can spend anywhere from $200 to $300, depending on the condition and whether it's sealed or not. So that's a quick look at some of the more rare and collectible big box PC games, but I do need to do a huge shout out to Kevin Ng, who's a collector here in the Seattle area. Most of these games are actually his. His collection is epic. I'm so jealous, and he helped me out greatly with this video. As a matter of fact, if you are looking for help, if you go out to a thrift store or a pawn shop, and you find something that you don't know what it is, or maybe you just want to learn more about this type of collecting, he's an admin and part of an amazing Facebook group called the Big Box PC Game Collecting Group. I'll put a link down in the video description below. If you're remotely interested in learning about big box PC games, some of the more special titles to look out for, I highly recommend that you join it. It's amazing. Also, I'd love to know what you thought about this video, because we have just touched the tip of the iceberg when it comes to big box PC game collecting, because literally there are tens of thousands of them. And while I think we covered more kind of known titles in this video, we can go really obscure, really rare, and it'd be fun to do that. So let me know down in the comments below if you like this video and would like to see more. All right, guys, thank you very much for watching. Thank you for subscribing, and take care. At the end here, I do want to bring something up, and that is, occasionally people accuse me of trying to raise the prices of video games, and that is absolutely not my intention with a video like this. It really isn't. I mean, I'm not a reseller myself, and honestly, the pool of people that are looking for PC games like this is really small. Most of these games were already expensive. My goal with this is simply just to educate and also celebrate how cool and collectible these games are. All right, guys, have a great day.